The morning rose cold and silver over the financial district, and the headquarters of Monroe Medical Systems stood like a glass blade against the sky. On every floor, the air seemed to hum with the same anxious frequency. Phones rang in patterns that no one wanted to answer. The lobby television cycled the same headlines about a recall, about hospital complaints, about a young chief executive whose name the press had begun to use the way it once used the names of her father's competitors. Stock tickers crawled in red. On the 42nd floor, a board was preparing to sign a deal that promised rescue and threatened ruin in equal measure. Callista Monroe stood at the head of the long boardroom table in a cream sheath dress and a pair of heels that had cost more than most of her employees made in a week. Her chestnut hair fell past her shoulders, brushed glass smooth, and her face had the kind of careful composure people earn after they have spent enough nights crying alone to know how to never cry in front of a room. She was 28 years old. The company she ran had been her father's. The crisis on her shoulders was newer than her tenure. Around her, the directors were arranging their leather portfolios. Henry Alden, the chairman, sat at the far end with his sleeves rolled twice and a fountain pen uncapped in his hand. Vivian Price, the chief financial officer, was already deep in a stack of liquidity charts. Elias Grant, the general counsel, was reviewing a contract with the patient irritation of a man who believed his department had not missed anything in 20 years. They had decided by silent agreement to spare Callista the embarrassment of a public collapse. The deal in front of them belonged to a fund called Northbridge Capital. On paper, it would inject enough cash to weather the recall storm. In reality, it would bind Monroe Medical to 2 new board seats, a price-protected equity tranche, and a triggering clause buried in subsection language so dense that even Elias had read past it twice and called it standard. Then the boardroom door opened, and a man stepped in who did not belong there. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark brown hair cut short, a square jaw, and the steady eyes of someone who had not slept enough in a long time, but had also stopped expecting to. His suit was navy blue, plain, and old. The cuffs were softened by years of pressing. The shoulders no longer quite matched the line of his frame. The tie was tidy, and the color of something washed many times. In his right hand was a leather briefcase whose corners had given up. With his left hand, he held the smaller hand of a 6-year-old boy. The boy was clutching a battered toy ambulance to his chest, looking up at the room with the cautious wonder of a child who had been told to be brave. Callista looked at the man from the heels of his shoes, polished but worn, to the cuff of his jacket, frayed but ironed, and she felt the room tilt toward inconvenience. "I'm sorry," she said, and the room heard the sword inside the courtesy. "Who let you in here?" "Henry Alden invited me," the man answered, calm as snowfall. "My name is Corbin Hayes." Henry began to introduce him properly, but Callista raised one hand without taking her eyes off Corbin. She tilted her head at the cuff of his jacket. A quiet, deliberate smile moved across her face. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "do you really believe a discount suit is going to save my company today?" A few of the men around the table laughed. They laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that polite people use to assure their boss they have heard her wit. The sound found Otis. The boy looked down at the toy ambulance in his arms and pressed it tighter to his ribs. Corbin did not move. He did not look at his sleeve. He looked at his son and he squeezed the small hand once, and then he stepped to the table and laid a manila folder down on the polished walnut. "If you sign with Northbridge today," he said, "this company will be dead before Friday." 4 years earlier, Corbin Hayes had been the kind of analyst people listened to before they understood why. He was a senior risk specialist for an auditing firm that contracted with medical device manufacturers, and his particular gift was a kind of patient hearing. He could sit with 1,000 pages of shipping logs and certification numbers and maintenance schedules, and he could find the wrong note inside the orchestra. Colleagues used to joke that Corbin could hear a system cracking before it knew it was about to break. He had been working a regional contract the night his wife died. The details were small and ordinary and unbearable. A respiratory clinic, a medication infusion, a sequence of judgments that should have been routine and were not. By the time Corbin reached the hospital, the chart said her name and a time of death, and Otis was 2 years old in a stranger's arms, holding a blue blanket someone had handed him. Corbin did not become a different man after that. He became a smaller one in the gentlest sense of the word. He turned in his notice. He took a contract role with a clinic network in his county, then a string of quieter jobs that paid less and let him pick Otis up from school. He kept a budget on a printed sheet on the refrigerator. The navy suit he was wearing today belonged to that earlier life. It had been tailored for him in a different city, in a different decade of his confidence. He had not bought a new one. Every time the budget listed a margin, he steered the margin toward Otis. New shoes for school. A booster seat that fit the new car. Premiums for the supplemental policy he refused to drop after what had happened. The savings line on the printed sheet had a name written next to it in pencil, and the name was not his. Earlier that morning, when Corbin had been knotting his tie at the bathroom mirror, Otis had stood in the doorway in his small jeans and asked, in a voice trying to be helpful, whether his daddy needed a new shirt. Corbin had crouched to his son's eye level and looked at him a long, careful moment. "No, buddy," he had said. "An old shirt doesn't make me say wrong things." Otis had asked if he could bring his ambulance, and Corbin had said yes. The toy ambulance was the last gift his mother had ever given him. The blue paint of the rear door had been worn away by a small thumb that had gone there for comfort, more times than anyone had counted. He was a man who had once been very good at his job and had decided on the worst day of his life that the second best version of himself would be the version that came home. Monroe Medical Systems had been built by a man whose handshake meant something in 3 states. Callista's father had spent 30 years making infusion pumps that hospitals trusted. When he died of a stroke in his own office at the age of 63, the firm did not know how to breathe without him. Callista had inherited a public relations problem before she had inherited a company. Reporters had wanted to know if a young woman with 2 graduate degrees and not enough gray hair could run a manufacturer of life-critical equipment. Industry analysts had used the word transition the way doctors use the word manageable. The board had told her to be visible. For 2 years, she had been visible. She had walked the floor of the largest plant. She had answered her own emails until 2 in the morning. Most days the company had felt like a thing she could carry. Then the field reports began. A nurse in a hospital in the Midwest reported a pump alarm she did not understand. A respiratory unit in the Southeast logged a pressure deviation that resolved itself before the technician arrived. A pediatric ward replaced a unit that had simply stopped in the middle of a shift for 90 seconds. None of the reports were catastrophic on their own. None had killed anyone. But there were enough of them, and they came close enough together, and the trade press began to use a word that no chief executive in medical devices ever wanted to see: pattern. Cash had begun to leave the company through every door at once. The credit lines tightened first, the lawyers grew quieter, and the institutional buyers asked for joint review meetings in tones that suggested they had already drafted exit clauses. By the time Northbridge Capital arrived on a Friday afternoon with a term sheet and a smile, the company was 8 days from a covenant breach and 40 days from a recall ruling. Northbridge had a reputation for arriving at exactly the right moment. To its admirers, this looked like vision. To Henry Alden, who had been on 3 boards and lost 2 of them to similarly opportune saviors, it looked like timing. It was Henry who had called Corbin. He had done so in his own name on his own line, after a former auditor he trusted had passed along a 1-page memo that pointed at numbers that did not match the public story. The memo had not been a pitch. It had been the careful, almost reluctant work of a man who had noticed something he could not unnotice. Henry had read the memo twice and had asked the auditor for the author's name. He had reached Corbin at 6 in the morning. Corbin had agreed to come on one condition. He could not afford a sitter on this notice, and he would not leave his son. Henry had said the boy was welcome in any room he was welcome in. That was the room they were all sitting in now. Callista Monroe was not a cruel woman. She was a frightened one, dressed every morning in the careful armor of a person who had decided, before anyone else could decide for her, that no one would ever again look at her and use the word lucky. She had grown up watching her father be taken seriously. He had simply behaved as if seriousness were the natural temperature of a room, and the room had warmed to match him. After he died, Callista had stepped into his office and discovered that seriousness, for a woman in her position, was not a temperature. It was a performance, and the audience scored every gesture. She had learned the small economies of authority, the exact length of a pause before answering a question, the precise pitch of a no that did not invite negotiation, the shoes, the hair, the brand of pen on the table. She had learned that an excellent woman in an excellent dress could sometimes be heard, and that a brilliant woman in a tired blouse would not be. What she had not learned, in the rush of those 2 years, was the trap inside her own armor. She had spent so much of herself defending against being underestimated that she had begun to underestimate, the same way, anyone whose surface did not match her own. She did not see this in herself. So when a tall man in an old Navy suit walked into her boardroom on the worst day of her year, holding the hand of a child, Callista did not see a senior risk analyst with a folder full of shipping records. She saw a threat to the seriousness she was building. She saw a man whose tie color implied that her crisis was not important enough to dress for. She saw a small boy whose presence implied that she was running a daycare instead of a company. She made the small, fast defensive choices that frightened people make. Several weeks later, she would understand what she had done. She would not forgive herself for several months. But none of that had happened yet. In the boardroom, on the 42nd floor of her father's company, Callista Monroe was still wearing her armor and still very afraid. She turned her gaze again to Corbin Hayes, and she heard her own voice speak before she had decided what to say. "Why," Callista said, quiet and clear, "is there a child in my boardroom?" Henry began to answer for him. Corbin lifted a hand to stop the chairman, gently. He did not want anyone speaking for him in a room where he was being looked at like that. "My sitter canceled at 5 this morning," Corbin said. "I won't leave my son in a lobby. He'll sit quietly." "I need 10 minutes. You need 10 minutes, Callista repeated, as if examining the sentence for flaws. "Mr. Hayes, if you cannot organize your own personal calendar, I struggle to understand how you intend to organize the rescue of mine." The room laughed again, more cautiously this time. Corbin did not respond to the laugh. He had learned long ago that responding to laughter only fed it. He set his briefcase beside the chair Henry had pulled out for him and stayed standing. "Monroe Medical is hours away from $1 billion decision," Callista went on, and her voice was no longer quite under her control. "I do not need a man in a discount suit to tell me how to save my company." It was the word discount that did it. Otis heard it. He had been told by his father, only a few hours ago, that an old shirt did not make anyone wrong. He had believed his father, the way 6-year-olds believe their fathers. He had been holding that belief in his small chest the whole drive into the city, the whole elevator ride, the whole walk down the bright corridor. And now a beautiful, important-looking woman had told a room full of important men that his father's clothes were a joke, and the men had laughed, and the floor of his understanding moved underneath him. He tugged on Corbin's sleeve. He did it shyly, almost apologetically. He did not want to embarrass his father. "Daddy," he said, in a voice that was not quite a whisper, "is your suit really ugly?" The room heard him. For one strange, suspended second, no one breathed. The directors who had laughed sat very still. Vivian Price closed the folder in front of her. Henry Alden's jaw moved once. Callista Monroe felt something cold and sharp slide between her ribs, and she did not yet have the vocabulary to call it shame. Corbin knelt. He did it slowly and without performance, the way a parent kneels, when there is no one in the world for them but the child in front of them. He straightened the small collar of Otis's shirt. He set a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, buddy," he said. "It's just old. Sometimes people mistake old clothes for someone who isn't worth listening to." "They're wrong." Otis nodded, very seriously, and pressed his ambulance against his ribs again. Corbin stood. He did not look at Callista with anger. He looked at her the way an honest man looks at someone who has just done something they will have to live with, and he turned to the table and laid his hand on the manila folder. "You can ask me to leave," he said to her. "That's your right. Before I do, you're going to want to read what's inside this folder." Callista's voice, when she found it, was not as crisp as she wanted. "Security," she said. A man in a dark blazer stepped in from the corridor. Henry Alden raised his pen. "Callista, this is my decision, Henry," she said. She did not look at him. She did not look at Corbin. She was looking at the toy ambulance Otis was holding, and she could not have said why. Corbin took Otis's hand. He did not argue. He picked up the briefcase. He did not pick up the folder. He left the folder where it was, square in the middle of the polished walnut. At the door, he paused. "If you sign with Northbridge before 3 this afternoon," he said, "you are signing a death warrant. The folder explains why." He let his son out. The door closed behind them with a soft, expensive click. The corridor was quiet in a way the boardroom never was. Otis walked beside his father with the seriousness of a small adult, his hand small inside Corbin's, his other arm folded around the ambulance. They reached the elevator bank. Corbin pressed the button for the lobby. He did not say anything. Otis was looking up at his face, and Corbin knew that whatever he said next would matter more than it should. "Daddy," Otis said, "did I make you lose your job?" Corbin crouched in the elevator alcove. He set the briefcase down. He took Otis's small face in his hands. "No," he said. "You didn't. And it wasn't a job. It was a meeting. A meeting where I needed to tell some people something important. Did they listen? Not yet. Will they?" Corbin thought about it. He thought about the folder. He thought about Henry Alden's face. He thought about Vivian Price closing her folder in mid-sentence. He thought about the woman in the cream dress, who had said the word discount and was now sitting alone with a folder she had not asked for, on a table she had inherited. "Maybe," he said. The elevator opened. They got in. Otis leaned against his father's leg as the floors counted down. "Daddy," Otis said, smaller this time. "If the machines in the hospital break, will the people get hurt?" Corbin closed his eyes for a moment. "Some of them might," he said. "Like, Mommy got hurt?" Corbin breathed in, and he breathed out, and he set his hand on the back of his son's head. "Like Mommy," he said. Otis held the toy ambulance up between them, the way one holds a thing one wants to be sure another person can see clearly. "Then, can you fix it, Daddy?" In the lobby, on a couch in the corner near the security desk, a small boy in a red sweater took out a coloring book from his father's briefcase and lay on his stomach to color. His father sat on the couch beside him. 42 floors above them, a manila folder sat on a polished walnut table, and 3 minutes after the door had closed, Henry Alden reached across the table and pulled the folder toward him. "Henry," Callista said. He did not look up. He opened the folder. The first page was a one-paragraph cover letter, neatly typed, addressed to no one. It identified the author, summarized the problem, named the supplier, named the lot numbers, named the timeline, and offered to discuss any of it in person. The second page was a table. The table was the kind of table Henry Alden had read all his working life. It was the kind of document that had built and ended careers. Down the left side were the lot numbers of Monroe medical infusion pumps that had triggered field complaints in the past 9 weeks. Across the top were the manufacturing date, the assembly line identifier, the pressure valve component identifier, and the hospital where the complaint had originated. The pattern was visible without commentary. Every flagged unit had been assembled in a single 9-week window, on lines 2 and 4, using pressure valves identified as lots 17C and 19A. Every one of those valves had been certified by a single subcontractor. Merrick Components. Henry Alden looked up. "Vivian," he said. Vivian Price slid 2 chairs over and pulled the folder toward her without asking. She had the careful, almost suspicious calm of a woman who had been a chief financial officer for 16 years in 3 industries, and had learned to mistrust beautiful coincidences. She turned the table page. She turned the next page, which was a 1-month accounts payable extract for the procurement category that included Merrick Components. She turned the next page, which was a spreadsheet of unit costs for pressure valves over the past 18 months. Her face did the work that her voice was not yet ready to do. "Henry," she said finally, "the unit price on the Merrick valves drops by 19% in the 3rd quarter of last year. The volume stays exactly the same. Meaning someone bought a cheaper part and booked it as the certified part, or the certified part was discounted without a quality renegotiation. Either of those should have triggered an internal flag. Neither did." Elias Grant, who had been listening without speaking for several minutes, reached for the folder next. He turned to a tab marked Legal. He read a page. He read it again. He read a 3rd page. He set his glasses on the table. "Callista," he said. She did not respond. She was looking at the wall. "Callista, tell." She turned her head. "Section 12 Fort of the Northbridge Agreement," Elias said. "It allows them to appoint 2 additional independent directors if Monroe Medical becomes the subject of a, quote, expanded regulatory inquiry, end quote, after the financing closes. Mr. Hayes has flagged the language. He has also flagged the trustee schedule. If we sign with Northbridge today, and a recall investigation is open next week, they will hold 5 of 9 board seats inside 30 days. That is standard protective language," Callista said. The voice that came out of her was the voice she had been using all morning. It did not match her face. "It is standard," Elias said quietly. "What is not standard is that Northbridge purchased $40 million of our subordinated notes through a Delaware vehicle 3 weeks before our first field complaint became public." The room went still in a different way than before. "They were already positioned," Vivian said. "They were already positioned," Elias said. Henry Alden closed the folder. He did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice in a board meeting in 19 years. He did not need to. "Callista," he said. "We just escorted out of this room the only person who walked into it understanding exactly what is happening to us." Callista Monroe sat very still in her cream dress. She was 28 years old. She had been the chief executive of her father's company for 2 years and 4 months. She was, in this moment, more alone than she had ever been in her life. She pushed back her chair. She stood. She walked the length of the boardroom, opened the door, and went out into the corridor without speaking to anyone. The elevator ride to the lobby took 38 seconds. Callista counted them. She counted them because she did not want to count what she would say. She had built her whole adult life on never being the one who came down. She came up. She came in. She arrived. Other people descended to her, were summoned to her, were placed on her schedule by an assistant who had learned to speak in the gentle, immovable verbs of executive time. The elevator's slow drop felt, to her, like a small surrender. The lobby was bright. The marble was glossy under her heels. She turned the corner past security and saw them. Corbin Hayes was sitting on a low couch with his head bent. He was tying his son's shoe. The toy ambulance was on the cushion beside them. The briefcase was on the floor. Callista stopped walking. The most composed person in this entire tower, in this entire morning, was a man in a worn navy suit kneeling on a lobby couch, tying a shoelace. Otis saw her first. The boy went very still. He pulled his foot back, very slightly, the way an animal pulls back from a sound it has not yet decided about. Corbin saw the movement before he saw her. He looked up. Callista crossed the last few feet. She did not know what to do with her hands. She put them at her sides. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "the board would like you to come back upstairs." Corbin finished the bow on Otis's shoe. He set the small foot gently down. He did not stand. He looked up at her from where he was, and Callista realized with a small, exact pain that this was the first time someone had looked up at her, in her own building, and made her feel small. "Does the board want me?" Corbin asked, "or do they want the folder?" She had no answer ready. "Because the folder is in your hands, Ms. Monroe. If you needed the folder, you would be finished with me." "We need you," Callista said. It came out smaller than she had meant. It came out true. Corbin looked at his son. He looked at the toy ambulance on the couch. He looked, finally, at her. "My son," he said quietly, "just had to ask his father if his clothes are ugly. In a room you control. Before I come back upstairs, I need you to understand that." Callista nodded. Her throat had closed. "I understand," she said. "No," Corbin said. There was no anger in it, not yet. Callista crouched. She had not crouched in heels in this lobby in 4 years, and she crouched now with the slow, unpracticed care of a woman whose body was used to being looked up at. She lowered herself until her face was level with the small face of a 6-year-old boy in a red sweater holding a battered toy ambulance. Otis did not look at her. He looked at his ambulance. His shoulders were tight. "Otis," Callista said. She used his name carefully, like a borrowed thing. "I owe you an apology." He looked up, just enough to check her face. "I laughed at your daddy's clothes," she said. "I did it in front of a lot of grown-ups and they laughed too because I was the one who started it. That was wrong. Your daddy's clothes do not make him small. I was the one who acted small." "I am sorry." Otis searched her face for a long second. He had inherited his father's patient eyes. He turned the ambulance over in his hands. "Is your stomach okay?" he asked. It was not the question she had expected. "Yes," she said. "Why?" "Daddy says when grown-ups feel bad inside, it makes their tummy hurt. So I just check." Callista, who had not cried in front of another person since she was 17 years old, felt water gather in her eyes and held it there with sheer practiced will. "My stomach feels a little sad," she said. Otis nodded as if this confirmed his theory. Then, very seriously, he asked, "Do you need my daddy to fix the machines?" "In the hospital ones?" "Yes," Callista said, "very much." Otis looked up at his father. "Daddy," he said, "if the machines hurt people, Mommy would be sad. Can you help them?" Corbin did not answer right away. Callista understood, with the slow understanding of a person being taught something for the first time, that the man in front of her was being asked to choose between protecting his son's heart and protecting strangers in hospital beds. She understood also that his son had just made the choice for him. "Okay, buddy," Corbin said. "I will help." He turned to Callista. He stood, and she rose with him. "I will come back," he said. "I have 3 conditions. Name them. 1. You stop the Northbridge signing until the analysis is complete and verifiable, not delayed. Every decision from this point forward prioritizes patients and frontline employees. Stock price recovers as a consequence of doing the right thing, not as the goal of doing the wrong one. Done. 3. When I speak upstairs, no one interrupts me. Not even you." Callista, who had spent her whole career interrupting people because interrupting was how she had survived being interrupted, felt the weight of her own armor for the first time as a thing she could choose to set down. "Done," she said. They rode the elevator back up together. Otis stood between them, holding his father's hand on one side and, after a small, shy interval, allowing Callista to hold his other hand. None of them spoke. The elevator counted up. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, the air had changed. The boardroom door was already propped open. Henry Alden was standing beside it. Vivian Price was at the table. Elias Grant had a yellow pad and 3 pens out. which Elias did when something was about to be either fixed or filed. A young woman from Vivian's office offered to sit with Otis in the small glass-walled meeting room next door, where there were colored pencils and a paper plate of cookies that someone had quietly produced from somewhere. Otis looked up at his father. Corbin nodded. The boy went, ambulance and all, and sat very politely in a swivel chair with his feet not quite reaching the floor. Through the glass, he could see his father across the corridor. Corbin did not sit at the table. He stood at the head of it, where Callista had been standing 2 hours before. Callista took a chair on his right side. He did not begin with himself. If this were a design failure, Corbin said, it would be everywhere. It would be in every line, every plant, every shipment, every quarter. It is not. It is in a window of 9 weeks, on lines 2 and 4, in pumps that contain pressure valves drawn from 2 specific lots. The valves were certified by Merrick Components. Their certification is forged. The shipping logs do not match the production calendar of the Merrick facility on file with the agency. Some of the certification stamps use a format the agency retired 16 months ago. Vivian was nodding. She had cross-referenced 2 of those points before he sat down. The Northbridge Agreement, he continued, is structured so that the moment a regulatory inquiry expands, 2 more board seats fall to them. They positioned their note holdings before our first complaint became public. They are not arriving to save the company. They are arriving to take it cleanly while the rest of you are too tired to notice the difference. Elias's pen moved across the yellow pad in short, decisive lines. Here's what I propose, Corbin said. 7 steps. You will not like the timeline. You will like the outcome better than any other timeline available to you. He laid them out without raising his voice. Step 1. Stop the Northbridge signing before 3 this afternoon. The room could not call it a delay. It had to call it a stop, and it had to put the stop in writing. Step 2. Issue a transparent advisory to every hospital with affected lots. Do not panic, recall the entire field. Recall the affected window. Tell the truth about the lots and the valves. Step 3. Convene an independent technical panel within 48 hours to confirm the lot-level analysis on lines 2 and 4. Step 4. Freeze the Merrick contract and preserve every email, invoice, sample, and travel record. Lock the chain of custody before anyone has time to clean a file. Step 5. Self-report to the agency. Voluntarily. Today. Before a leak makes the report involuntary. Step 6. Use the analysis and the fraud preservation order to renegotiate the credit facility for 90 days at floor terms. The bank does not want a default. The bank wants a story it can defend to its own committee. Step 7. Keep every line worker, every quality engineer, every field technician on the payroll. They are the only people in this company who can rebuild what trust the next year is going to ask of them. Fire them, and the company will survive the recall and lose the future. Vivian was writing. She had stopped looking up. Cash impact, Corbin said. Stop sign on Northbridge protects equity. Voluntary disclosure improves the agency posture by an order of magnitude. Lot-level recall saves an estimated 70% of unit replacement cost versus a field-wide recall. Bank renegotiation, given documented third-party fraud, gives you 90 days. 90 days is enough. Elias looked up. It will hold, he said. Vivian set her pen down. It will hold, she said. Henry Alden looked at Callista. He did not say anything. He was a man who had spent 40 years reading the rooms he was sitting in. He let her read this one. Callista understood. Corbin closed the folder. I have said what I came to say, he said. The decision belongs to the board. He turned, picked up his briefcase, and started for the door. Henry Alden stood up. Mr. Hayes, he said, please do not go. Vivian Price stood up. We need you to lead the recovery committee, she said. Not in name, in room. Elias Grant, who had not stood for any executive in a decade, stood. You saw what we missed, he said. I cannot lead a defense without you in it. A board member at the far end of the table, an older woman whose name was Margaret Owens, and who had said almost nothing all morning, spoke for the first time. If you walk out, Mr. Hayes, she said, we have a folder we cannot read. And Callista Monroe stood. She did not adjust her dress. She did not look at the wall. She looked at him. I mocked your suit because I thought it told me what you were worth, she said. I was wrong. Mr. Hayes, I am not asking. I am begging you. Please stay. Corbin looked through the glass wall of the small meeting room. His son was leaning on his elbows, watching, the toy ambulance standing upright on the table beside the cookies. Otis was very still. He had been listening, the way children listen to the parts of the world they do not yet have words for. Corbin set his briefcase back down on the boardroom floor. He did not say yes immediately. I will stay through the crisis, he said. Interim. 3 conditions of my own. Vivian opened a fresh page on her pad. Wantatski. No frontline scapegoats. If anyone in procurement was complicit with Mr. Merrick, that person answers for it. The line workers and the quality engineers do not. They will not be sacrificed to protect anyone in this room. Henry Alden nodded once. 2. Monroe Medical will issue a public apology to every hospital and every patient affected. Plain language. No legal hedging. If a child was scared. If a nurse worked through her break to monitor a unit, she should have been able to trust. If a family lost sleep because we lost rigor, we say so. Without footnotes. Elias Grant looked at the ceiling for one long second, the way lawyers look at ceilings when they are agreeing to a thing their professional habits would normally forbid. Then, he nodded. 3. Establish a hardship fund for employees who are single parents, or who have a child in active medical treatment. Funded out of the executive bonus pool, this year and next. I know what it is to choose between a paycheck and a hospital corridor. The company that almost lost itself this morning can afford to make sure no one inside it ever has to make that choice alone. Vivian wrote it down. Henry looked at Callista. Approved, Callista said. 3 months later, the recall was over. The lot-level advisory had held. The independent panel had confirmed every line of Corbin's analysis. Merrick Components was under a federal investigation. Dante Merrick had been served at his office on a Tuesday morning. His attorney had stopped returning calls a week later. Northbridge Capital had withdrawn its term sheet, citing market conditions. The truth, which the bank never said aloud, was that the moment its trustee schedule had become a matter of public record, the trade press had stopped pretending Northbridge was a savior and had started using a different word. The credit facility had been renegotiated. The hospitals had stayed. The board had not added a single seat. Callista Monroe was still the chief executive of Monroe Medical Systems, but she was a different chief executive than she had been. She walked the floor of the assembly plant in flat shoes now. She sat in on quality reviews. She had introduced herself by name to every line technician on shifts 2 and 4, and she had apologized to several of them, in private, for things she had not previously known she had done. On the day Corbin Hayes was formally announced as Director of Operational Recovery and Ethics, he wore the navy blue suit. Vivian had offered, very quietly, to have a new one made for him on the company account. He had thanked her. He had said, maybe next month. Today I would like to wear this one. He walked into the boardroom on the 42nd floor a few minutes before the announcement. The board was already seated. When the door opened, every member at the table stood. No one laughed. No one looked at the cuff of his jacket. No one had to ask why he was there. Otis was sitting in a small chair at the back of the room, the toy ambulance on his lap. He had been told he could come today, if he wanted to. He had wanted to. Daddy, Otis said in a small, clear voice that carried, you still did not get a new suit. Corbin crouched, the way he had crouched in the lobby 3 months earlier, the way he had crouched every morning of his son's life. "I will get one, Muddy," he said. "I just wanted you to remember something today. Do not ever let anyone decide what you are worth by what they see you wearing." Callista Monroe walked to the back of the room. Her heels were quieter than they had been 3 months ago, because they were lower. She crouched beside Otis's chair. "Your daddy did not save this company because his suit was new," she said. "He saved it because he did not walk out when the people who needed the truth were the same people who had not earned it from him." Otis looked at her for a long moment. Then he held the toy ambulance up, the way one offers something important. He did not give it to her. He just let her see it. "My mom gave me this," he said. "It is beautiful," Callista said. "She would like you," Otis said now. Callista, who had not been able to cry in the lobby, did not cry now either. But she said thank you, and she meant it, and she stood up slowly. Corbin moved to the head of the table. He set his briefcase down. He opened the folder. The board sat down with him. Outside, far below, the city was ordinary. Cabs honked. People walked. Hospitals across the country were running infusions on Monroe medical pumps that had been verified, lot by lot, by a recovery committee that included 2 engineers from Line 4 and a quality lead from a shift that had once been afraid to speak up. None of them knew yet that they had been saved by a man in an old suit who had refused to walk out. They did not need to know. The work was the work. That afternoon, Corbin took Otis home early. They stopped at a small diner near the train station. They ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup. The toy ambulance sat on the table between them. "Daddy," Otis said, halfway through his soup. "Do you have to go back tomorrow?" "Yes, buddy." "Will they laugh at your suit?" Corbin smiled. He looked at his son. "No, buddy," he said. They learned. Outside, snow had started to fall, very softly, the kind of snow that meant the year was turning. In a glass tower in the financial district, a young chief executive was sitting alone at a long boardroom table, looking at a worn navy suit jacket that had been hung carefully over the back of an empty chair. She had asked Corbin if she could keep it in the room for the day. He had said yes, but only the day. She thought, on her drive home that night, that the most expensive thing in any room was almost never what people had been trained to look at. That a 6-year-old boy had been right that morning, in a way no consultant had ever been right. The cheap suit had not made Corbin Hayes small. It had only made the blindness of the people who had once laughed at it impossible to deny.